Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. In today's video, we shall be beginning our coverage of the second two-parter in the anime, that being Predicament Part 1, or as it's known in the Japanese original, Mabel's Big Prediction Part 1. As with my last two-part episode review, I will be reviewing this episode on its own merits and how it connects to the second part. But we'll be waiting until part 2 to share my thoughts on the two-parter as a whole. I hope you understand. It just seems like the right thing to do in order to be consistent. This episode was originally released in Japan on July 20th, 2002 as the 41st episode, while in the English dub it was released on March 22nd, 2003 as the 38th episode, likely due to the change between release dates of other episodes, as opposed to anything wrong with the episode itself. Enough of this sort of episode review talk, though. Let us start with the episode coverage proper. This episode opens with an outside shot of Castle Dedede at night, as we cut to the bedroom where the king is sleeping in. In the Japanese original, there's like this weird pun that didn't really work in English that 4Kids removed. It basically was like, Z's are good for sleeping. Honestly, I don't get it either, so if you don't get it, it's understandable. We pan over to the window as we see an ominous red glow. It glows so intense that the king awakens, who groggily goes over to investigate it. He opens the blinds and sees a burning sphere that, to the shock of the king, grows in size and turns to a gigantic red demonic fanged flaming Kirby. Now, understandably, if you see a giant demonic Kirby, the king starts freaking out at the fanged monstrosity, which bursts through the window and chases after Dedede. Dedede tries to exit his room, but the doors are locked. The king screams in terror as he begins burning alive and in desperation begins attacking back with his hammer, to little avail as the demonic Kirby simply laughs evilly. It is then revealed that this whole incident was in fact a dream, as King Dedede awakens, and it turns out that he's been hitting poor old Escargoon with his hammer the entire time. Confused, the king asks what is going on, to which Escargoon, with a huge bump on the head, explains that he was sleepwalking, or I guess in his case, sleepwhacking, while the king collapses and explains his dream with the giant demonic flaming Kirby. After the jazzy intro, we cut to the middle of the day where we see King Dedede informing his Waddle Dee guards that they are to defend him against Kirby at any cost. Waddle Doo walks up to him and asks if the king is really scared of Kirby. The obstinate king denies this arrogantly, but instantly is shaking in fear when Waddle Doo informs him that Kirby is playing in the castle right now. Oh! The king jumps on Waddle Doo and begs for protection hysterically and hyperventilating a lot. We cut to up on a balcony where we see Kirby, Tough, and the Cappy Kids interacting as Tough hands out lollipops, saving the biggest for our pink baby. Kirby is happy and jumps onto the balcony's guardrails. Tough tries to warn him to be careful, but the baby doesn't listen and drops his lollipop. The lollipop happens to land onto King Dedede's back as the Waddle Dees dissipate to enforce his ruling. King Dedede looks up and sees Kirby floating down from above, and seeing the demon, King Dedede runs, saying Kirby is after him again, and runs away in fear as Kirby chases after him because he just wants the candy, unaware of the pain and suffering he's causing the king in his panic attack. He enters into his throne room and closes the door behind him, though he thinks himself safe after taking a peek, freaks out when it's revealed that Kirby somehow got into the throne room anyway. He flees in fear down the halls, chased by Kirby, pushing both the concerned escargoon and the unaware Tiff out of the way. After recovering, Tiff asks what is going on here, as she can tell something is wrong with him. Escargoon explains that it's Kirby's fault. Tiff asks why that's the case as Kirby walks past, and Escargoon says it's none of her business, as she is left even more confused. We see King Dedede fleeing still from Kirby, and the king, unaware, slams straight into a wall. Kirby grabs the loosened lollipop from his back and wanders off. A concerned escargoon goes over to the king and asks again what is wrong with him. The king restates the fact that Kirby is chasing after him and he's scared. Escargoon is confused by his fear from a dream, to which the king says he'll get his dream interpreted as we see the two leave for Capitan. Yes, he mispronounced it, not me. We see Kirby, Tiff, Tough, and the Cappy Kids observing the king's exit from a balcony. Tough asks what this is all about and what the king is up to, with his sister Tiff saying it's likely something stupid, and it is. In the Japanese original, there is a cut scene of King Dedede and Escargoon driving to Cappytown, in which Escargoon questions the king's trust in a bogus fortune teller like Mabel, when he has a genius like himself to work with him, to which the king hits him over the head with that mallet. I thought this was a nice little scene that did more with Escargoon and King Dedede's relationship as a sort of boss-employee manner. Unfortunately, 4 kids removed it, which is sad to see. Strangely, it was reused in the Fright for the Fox Box special that I'll cover much later in this video series. The pair arrive in Cappytown and are paused by a group of Cappies in the streets. The king tells them to get out the way, but Mayor Len Blustergas says they have a grievance with him. The king is confused as Police Chief Bookums explains that they want an answer for a request. The king is confused and asks what the request is, to which Bookums explains that they wanted a nice park for the kids to play on and that it's quite an old request that they made several years ago. The king says he'll think about it, to which Kawasaki and Gengu point out that they've been asking about this for 3 whole years. Escargoon explains that they can write a formal letter that the king will read once he learns how to read, and the king tells them to get out the way and hits the gas as the crowds flee. He rolls up on Mabel's fortune teller store, I guess. The Cappies wonder what this is about as we see Samo say something about Mabel that implies he helps her out. It is here that we see the next change between versions that we see throughout the episode. You see, in the Japanese original, he very subtly implies that he helps Mabel out with her predictions, but in the English dub, he outright says he wishes the king came to his bar so he could tell Mabel what to say. And it's just kind of like, man, how did this guy keep a secret for this long if he's this blunt about it? Luckily, he manages to cover up what he just said. Unluckily, we also see an animation error here where Kawasaki's feet are miscolored orange instead of red. We cut to the inside of Mabel's place where we see her staring into her crystal ball as Dedede explains his recurring nightmare. Mabel is mildly interested when the king explains it. She looks into her crystal ball, which glows blue as she starts laughing and says, "It's not Kirby." The king demands to know what the creature is, and Mabel says the crystal will tell all. Escargoon makes a snarky comment, but the king tells him to be quiet before she explains that the monster is his conscience. Dedede is confused by the concept as she explains what a conscience is, and Escargoon is dismissive that such a piece of garbage like the king even has a conscience. But Mabel says everyone has a conscience deep down. Dedede concedes to this and asks what he can do to ease his conscience that's plaguing him. She says he might be haunted by a promise that he's not kept. Though Escargoon is annoyed, Dedede is genuinely kinda scared. Mabel elaborates that by ignoring the Cappy's wishes, his conscience has come to punish him. The king, however, has had enough and leaves Mabel, dismissive of her warning, and Escargoon and the king re-enter their vehicle with the king picking up a megaphone and declaring to the town that Mabel is a fraud before leaving in a huff. Mabel complains about not being paid when Tiff and Tuff come up and ask her what Dedede was asking of her. She explains the terrible dreams Dedede is having about a monster Kirby, which confuses Tiff and amuses Tuff. Mabel sighs about the king not believing in her and that she still has powers, and Tuff and Kirby go run off to menace King Dedede despite Tiff's warning them not to. Tiff wonders why Mabel is so worried. Then Samo the bartender says he might know and takes Tiff to his bar. I guess they're okay with underage drinking. I'm joking, of course. Where we see him give her a fruit punch that I hope is not alcoholic and explains that she's not really a real fortune teller. Rather, she's a really good counselor and that she's a really good listener. Tiff is shocked at the revelation and says she thought Mabel had special spiritual powers. He says that she has the special power to see into a person's heart, even if not necessarily into the future, leaving Tiff confused as he just then realizes what he said. Man, you're really bad at keeping secrets, Samo. The Japanese original has him say he and Mabel talk about the stuff from work. There's a cutscene in the Japanese original where she asks Samo if he can ask Mabel to investigate Dedede's dreams and takes a sip of her drink. 4Kids removed this scene, and honestly, not much was lost. I mean, it is a nice little interaction. It does explain what's going to happen later in the episode, but it wasn't really needed. We cut to that night at Castle Dedede, where we see Escargoon making some high-powered coffee for King Dedede to drink so he doesn't fall asleep again, and is quite bitter as the king recoils in disgust. Yet the king, despite just drinking what is essentially pure, superpowered coffee, falls asleep almost immediately. Escargoon, concerned about him having a nightmare, hits him in the head with a hammer, causing him surprisingly little annoyance as the groggy king wonders what's going on. Escargoon gives him a triple espresso. The king declares it is disgusting but drinks it anyway. Escargoon goes to get him another cup, but the king falls asleep almost as soon as the snail's back is turned. The king falls over, and we cut to inside his mind as reused footage of the demon fire Kirby scares him as the background is set afire. Escargoon walks over to the sleeping Dedede, who is having a severe night sweat. He gets up, seemingly awake, then grabs the hammer and starts hitting Escargoon straight into the ground. We then cut to the outside halls, as Fololo, Falala, Tuff, and Kirby are seen listening in on the whole affair. Fololo and Falala comment on this, as Tuff says they'll scare Dedede good, as Kirby is just there happy to be with his friends. We cut to Mabel's fortune-telling shop. She looks into her crystal ball, but says with great sadness that her crystal tells her nothing about King Dedede's dreams, with Tiff and Samo encouraging her to try, as she's the greatest psychic of all. But she says she can't see the future any more than anyone else. Samo tries to change the subject. Admittedly, he hasn't done the best job keeping the secret ever, but she admits to Tiff that she's no psychic, that Samo is the actual source of her predictions, and she tells her all the secrets that the two of them use to do their predictions. Again, Samo tries to change the subject, but Tiff says she has an idea and suggests they go investigate at Castle Dedede. We cut to the castle, where we see the three of them sneaking through the castle's halls. As they go up a flight of stairs, Tiff says King Dedede is probably already asleep, and Mabel suggests something in the castle is making him have such terrible nightmares. The group go upstairs into a kind of research lab / observatory, as Tiff explains to Mabel what it is. She also wonders why it's on the top floor when she trips on a wire and activates a panel that opens up the roof and reveals a huge telescope. Mabel asks what this telescope is, to which Tiff explains it's probably one of the many toys King Dedede bought but got sick of it, causing Mabel to make a very funny tax joke that is very relatable. She looks into the telescope, and Tiff asks if she sees anything, and she sees a lot, but is not sure of what is causing the nightmares until she spies a red dot. We cut to the king in bed as Escargoon tries to wake him up, to no avail, over concern of him having nightmares, but the king ignores him and falls asleep. Escargoon wishes him a good night's sleep, but skedaddles before he can get sleep-whacked again by the hammer, leaving the king alone in the dark. We see Tuff, Fololo, Falala, and Kirby sneak into the king's room. Tuff gives Kirby to quietly get on the king's chest and gives Kirby a flashlight with a red lens that makes the baby look more demonic. Tuff wakes the king up, who sees Kirby on his chest and is terrified. He flees the room as Tuff, Fololo, and Falala laugh at his terror, as Kirby is just frankly happy to be there. The king runs to the halls, but is scared by Kirby again and runs in the other direction. He calls up the enemy sales guy, who tries his slick buttering up routine, but the king tells him to can it and that he needs a monster to put out a fire. The enemy sales guy makes a hot pun and sends over the monster of the week, Friggy, via reused animation. So this is Friggy, a massive mammoth-like creature that, despite not having a named voice actor, makes these strange groaning noises. It has a nice color scheme with the pale blue and olive green highlights near the base of the figure, where the legs ought be. He also has a Gatling gun-like nose that shoots frigid ice blasts. Honestly, I find this monster design rather distinctive for the series, but also sufficiently simple that I really do think it would work in the video game series as well. Resuming with the plot, the enemy sales guy explains that Friggy can put the chill on anyone, and so Dedede says Friggy is great as the mammoth bursts through the castle's walls and begins attacking Kirby. Tiff tells him to watch out, but Friggy gets quite a few shots in, leaving Kirby partially frozen. The beast hits the ceiling, generating icicles that rain down on the poor Kirby, freezing him even more so. Friggy tries to stomp on Kirby, who dodges and slides across the frozen floor. Friggy slides after Kirby, while Dedede cheers him on. Tiff tells Kirby to try to suck it up, but Friggy's icy blasts are just too fast for the pink baby and pushes the baby right into the wall of ice, covering him. Dedede laughs as Escargoon arrives and complains about how cold it is, to which the king tells him to stop complaining, as it will put out the fire. Kirby recovers, but Tuff points out that he's no match for the beast. Friggy jumps up into the air and tries to crush Kirby, who just barely dodges and runs out into the castle's courtyard, as Friggy bursts the walls after him. Tiff, Tuff, Fola, and Fala run after him, with Tiff encouraging Kirby to try again, and the poor baby tries to suck, but Friggy blows him back again so hard, causing Kirby to impact into the wall. Tiff tries to encourage Kirby, who can barely stand, as Friggy comes over to him and corners him against the wall, and groans menacingly. However, we see the camera pan up to the balcony, where Meta Knight is just standing there with a torch, as he calls to Kirby and tells him to suck up this torch. Due to this line's odd delivery, it became a sort of small meme for a time.
Suck up this torch! Suck this torch! Suck this torch! Suck up this torch!
Regardless, Kirby sucks up this torch to become... Fire Kirby. I've already discussed this ability numerous times, which isn't surprising since it was the most commonly depicted copy ability in this show, with 9 appearances. So I highly recommend checking back on the review of the very first episode if you want more info on the ability. But I will say that it took the ability and put it into the anime context extremely well. It made the transition perfectly. Mabel, who is watching this, says that in shock that she didn't predict it. Meta Knight points at Kirby and says that even the coldest ice is no match for fire. As an answer, Fire Kirby then begins breathing flames onto Friggy, who groans in pain. Friggy tries to fight back with an ice blast, but Kirby, after a brief stalemate, overwhelms Friggy. Dedede, terrified, tries to encourage Friggy to fight back, but the mammoth, being no use against fire, only tries to flee before melting to death in a rather kind of gruesome manner, being turned into water, with the kids and Mabel cheering Kirby on for his victory. But they pause when Tiff points out how King Dedede is acting really scared due to Fire Kirby. Escargoon points out that the dreams have come true as Dedede tries to flee Fire Kirby, who jumps down from a tree in his general direction. Mabel, however, stops him and says she can explain. Both the king and Escargoon are skeptical of her as they view her as a fraud, but she says that his dream monster is not Kirby, to which the king demands to know who it is, as Mabel shows Dedede the problem in the observatory. The king, with Mabel's instruction, looks into the telescope and reviles in fear upon seeing the red star, which Mabel explains is an asteroid on its way to Popstar and will crash into the planet and destroy it and his kingdom. She says he must apologize and no longer blame Kirby for his nightmares. The king realizes his mistake and begins to laugh at the asteroid, being strangely not upset at the doomsday prediction, and soon collapses asleep. Escargoon, tired from a long day, falls asleep on the floor as well. Tiff, being the most reasonable, asks Mabel if what she said about the asteroid is true and if they'll be okay. How Mabel answers this is changed between versions. In the Japanese original, Mabel explains that the asteroid, which in that version is titled Phantom Star Gorath, which is a reference in name to Gorath, a Japanese movie in which a rogue white dwarf threatens Earth. And it is also similar to a story seen in Hellstar Ramina by the extremely talented writer Junji Ito, which in fact was not the planet. It was actually an alien in that context, but whatever. She explains that it would be silly if that was the case, and she said that she only claimed it would hit the kingdom just to get King Dedede to stop messing with Kirby. In the English dub, she says it will, but in 1,000 years. Honestly, both versions work, though the English dub is a bit more ominous, as it does imply that it will hit, just not in anybody's lifetime. We then cut to enemy headquarters as we see the enemy sales guy Nightmare looking at a screen diagram of the rogue star's path to Dreamland. In the Japanese original, they simply comment on how it will destroy Kirby in the Cataclysm. In the English dub, Nightmare is heavily implied to have sped up the process somehow. Honestly, I actually like this change a lot, as it just emphasizes the power of enemy more. Plus, it does make good sense that he would do this if given the opportunity. And it also gives Don Green's performance as a sales guy more room. The episode ends with Kirby looking through the telescope as Gorath speeds up its approach. It is also here that we see the final change between versions, as in the English dub, there is a sort of hype up for part 2, which isn't in the Japanese original. Now that that's done, let us cover the positives, negatives, and my final thoughts. In terms of positives, first, I want to say that King Dedede's role in this episode was honestly really good. Him dealing with a nightmare is very relatable. I'm sure we've all had that instance where a nightmare is just so horrifying that it's stuck with you long after the fact. Him being scared by Kirby is also really funny to watch, very karmatic for the king. Also, the interaction between the king and the Cappies involving the playground really highlights an aspect that the show doesn't do a lot of. Like, exactly what is his relationship? Is he more than just a petty tyrant? What exactly does he do? Why do they put up with him? And the fact that they don't really do that much with the show is kind of sad, but also understandable given its episodic nature. Secondly, I just absolutely love the monster of the week, Friggy. It was just outstanding. Truly, it is, without question, design-wise, one of the best monsters in the anime, and surely the best one that could actually work in the games. I know I've said that before, but it's true, especially here. The design is both unique, but simple enough to work in the games, being a proboscidean. Specifically, he's a mammoth, and I've made a whole 10-part video series on the evolution of elephants that I recommend you check out. In fact, I'll put it in the description down below. And I really would like it if you watched it. I think that will just emphasize why I like this creature so much. I just love elephants, and honestly, there's very few characters in the game series based off that group of animals. In the series, the only two others being a fan and a variant called Heat fan that honestly are more like Asian elephants and really haven't appeared in any recent games, so they've essentially been frankly forgotten by Hell. Which is kind of ironic since Fan replaced Rolling Turtle, which itself was forgotten. And I genuinely think Friggy could work as a mini boss. I know Mr. Frosty may already exist, but I don't know. I think Kirby series as a whole really needs to be more willing to make new bad guys that have the same copy ability. I just think it would make the series more interesting if you didn't know which copy ability you were going to get because there were constantly new bad guys. And really, that just doesn't happen a lot. Also, the asteroid, despite being more prominent in part 2, was really impactful, but I think I'll save more discussion about that specific aspect in part 2 when I get to reviewing it. I also thought Mabel was exceptionally well done in this episode. I know a lot of people don't really like these side characters, they much prefer Kirby, but I don't know, I think instances like this really make the world seem more in depth. I mean, they took what was essentially a background character with a unique aesthetic and gave her more depth. And her relation with Samo is just endearing, even if I don't think they're actually married, I think they're just close friends. Also, I thought Meta Knight was really funny. I know some people consider his involvement a bit stiff and unnecessary, but honestly, it's too meme worthy for me to criticize. Really, I wouldn't consider that a flaw. It's just funny. As for the negatives, I mean, there was an animation error, but it was really so minor. I just pointed out because it's kind of funny, and it really wasn't a negative one. I also thought Samo was just an absolute moron. Like, look, in the Japanese original, he said the same lines, but in a way that wasn't as just obvious. But here, he just blusters it out. And frankly, I am amazed that he's been keeping these secrets so well. The fact that nobody has figured out until this point truly astounds me. Like, this guy is absolutely incompetent when it comes to keeping secrets, which isn't a good trait to have, I think. But I understand that was like intentional, but I don't really like that. In terms of significant issues, however, there is one more. And honestly, that would be the scene of Dedede driving to Mabel's. I just thought it was a nice scene, and I really thought it was a shame that it was removed. But again, I wouldn't say there's really anything majorly wrong with this episode, just some minor issues that keep it from being 100% perfect. Overall, this was a great episode. As for the two-parter as a whole, I'll save that for next time, but I will say it's my least favorite of the two-parters in the series. But anyway, I am the Dark Master, and join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective, and have a wonderful day.